In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace a carburetor repair kit on an Echo trimmer. Many of the parts inside your trimmer's carburetor are made out of either plastic or rubber. Over time, these parts will deteriorate and begin to harden. This damage will be greatly accelerated if gas with ethanol in it is left sitting in the trimmer. This damage can begin in as little as 2 months. The carburetor repair kit consists of all of the parts you'll need to rebuild the carburetor. Rebuilding your carburetor is easy to do, and we're going to show you how. Carburetor repair kits, as well as many other parts, can be found on our website. Let's get started. I'll begin by removing the air filter cover and the air filter. Before we remove any of the fuel lines from either the carburetor or the fuel tank, you'll want to make sure that you've drained the gas from the fuel tank. Otherwise it will leak, as the fuel in the tank tends to be slightly pressurized. I've already drained the fuel, so we can go ahead and move on. Now I'll remove the 2 screws that secure each piece of the intake assembly to the engine. There's the air filter base and the air filter bracket. Now I'll remove the throttle cable and the fuel lines from the carburetor. If the intake gasket hasn't already removed itself, like mine did, it's likely stuck to either the back side of the carburetor or up against the isolator. Now we can clean the carburetor and install our carburetor repair kit. We'll begin the rebuilding process by first disassembling the carburetor. I'll start with the throttle body. There's a very small O-ring that attaches to the throttle body that seals the body from the rest of the carburetor. I'll go ahead and remove that O-ring. Inside the carburetor body, there's a small metal roller that rides against the throttle rotor, and I'll remove that roller. Next, I'll disassemble the primer side of the carburetor. First, I'll remove the 4 screws that secure everything. I'll pull away the plate, which secures the primer bulb. One more screw will allow us to remove the primer base. Here I have the reed valve and a gasket. Also beneath the primer base and the reed valve is a small filter. I'll pull it out of the carburetor. Next, I'll disassemble the diaphragm side of the carburetor. I'll remove the 2 screws that secure everything. Now I can pull away the metal plate, the diaphragm itself, and the gasket. With the diaphragm removed, now we have access to the metering needle and the lever. I'll remove this next. There's a spring behind the lever, so I want to hold the assembly down as I remove the screw. Then I'll release the tension on that spring and pull everything away. There's a couple of different ways you can clean your carburetor. The traditional way would be to use Carburetor Cleaner. With the carburetor method, I'll generally spray the carburetor off, as well as go into each of the small openings on the carburetor and clean them out. When using this method, you might be tempted to insert an object in each of the holes to help clean. However, you can actually damage the small openings if you do that, if you use anything made out of metal. The safe way to do it is to use something like fishing line. The soft fishing line will safely clean the openings without damaging them. Another method to clean your carburetor, and it's the method that I prefer and use myself, is an ultrasonic cleaner. The ultrasonic works by sending an ultrasonic shock wave through the water. The advantage to this system is that as long as water gets into each of the tiny passages within the carburetor, those passages will get cleaned. An ultrasonic cleaner like this can be picked up at a discount tool store for under $100, and it's really worth the investment if you do a lot of repair work yourself. To use the ultrasonic, I'll drop each of the parts I want to clean into the water. In this case, the main carburetor body, the throttle body, and the primer base. Then I'll set the amount of time I want to clean for and turn it on. Alright, our cleaning cycle in the ultrasonic has completed, so I'll go ahead and remove each of the parts. Now that they're out of the ultrasonic, I'll rinse off each of these parts with some clean water. Whether you used either carb cleaner or an ultrasonic cleaner to clean the carburetor parts, before you install the rebuild kit, you'll want to use some compressed air to blow the carb cleaner water out of each part. Now we'll install the rebuild kit. One thing I like to do to help keep your carburetor rebuild organized is to lay out each of the parts from each assembly on the carburetor in the order that they came off of the carburetor. So I'll just lay the parts out in a line, and then once everything is laid out, I can take the new parts from the kit and replace them for the old parts. That way I know I have everything I need to rebuild the carb. Now we can install the metering needle and metering lever. I'll install the needle onto the lever and insert the lever hinge pin into the lever. Now I can install this assembly onto the carburetor. I'll place the spring into the carburetor body. Then insert the needle and line up the lever with the spring. Once everything's in place, I'll secure it with the screw. With the metering needle assembly reinstalled, now we can move on to the diaphragm. First comes the diaphragm gasket, then the diaphragm itself. The metal portion goes down, the metal cover, and I secure it with the two screws. Now we'll move to the primer side of the carburetor. First we'll install the new reed valve, followed by the gasket and the primer bulb base. And the base is secured with a single screw. Now I'll install the primer bulb onto the primer base and the metal plate that secures the bulb. We'll finish up our rebuild on the throttle side of the carburetor. First goes the roller. Now place that tiny O-ring over the throttle rotor. Now insert the throttle body assembly back into the carburetor and secure it with the screws. Now we'll reinstall the fuel lines and the throttle cable to the carburetor. To install the fuel lines, first I need to figure out which one is the incoming line. To do that, I just open the gas tank, look inside, and find the line that has the fuel filter attached. In this case, it's the black one. The yellow one will be the return line. Now on the carburetor, I want to find the incoming side. To do that, I'll place my finger over each of the fuel line connections while priming. One of them won't let any air out, and the other will tend to suck against my finger, and that's the incoming line. So I'll attach the incoming line to the black or incoming fuel line, and the return line, in this case, to the yellow fuel line. Now I'll reinstall the throttle cable. First, I'll open up the throttle and thread the cable into the connection on the top of the carburetor. Next, I'll place the nut in its holder on the carburetor and tighten up the secondary nut with a wrench. Now I can reassemble all of the parts in the air intake assembly. I'll insert the screws through the bracket, then the brackets and screws through the air cleaner base, thread the screws through the carburetor, and last I'll install the intake gasket. Now this whole assembly will go back onto the motor. And I'll just reinstall the air filter and air filter cover.